So Sinead is a catechist at St George's in Derby, and in our first Catechist Network, I heard about how St George's, which I think may be one of few parishes in our diocese who've actually managed to keep the catechesis going through lockdown. He had quite a large number of children doing First Holy Communion. So Sinead, I'll pass over to you. It's quite nice doing it because me and Sinead know each other for years. We're both at school together. So Sinead, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit to everyone?
Yes, so my name's Sinead Love. Oh, I'm there. I've caught up. First of all, if you can hear panting, the dog is just out of shot. It's not me that's panting. So I've been a catechist at St George's Parish for 6 years now. This was like my first year really leading it. So I was thrown in at the deep end. And so I love it. So when lockdown hit, we just kind of poured all of our time and resources into setting up Zoom meetings, WhatsApp groups, that kind of thing, to try and keep it going. I mean, we're quite lucky because St George's has a very good relationship with the school. So we had St George's children, we had some of St Joseph's children. So it was quite an easy transition, and the way that St George's school were working was they did a lot of YouTube videos for the children, so they were quite used to that being part of their education. So it kind of made sense that on a Friday we were kind of doing little Zoom sessions, little YouTube videos, that kind of thing. We follow the I Belong programme. We've done that for, even before I started, we followed I Belong. So it was basically a case of setting the chapter, which we would normally do in the lessons that we wanted them to do, with the WhatsApp group that had everybody that consented to join on that. Always encouraged to send their pictures through, always encouraged to, if they've done some colouring, if they've done some extra stuff, send that through. We also have an email address, so if any parents wanted to discuss something separately, they could do that. We had, it was just all about adapting what we do in our lessons to being able to deliver that remotely, which is what schools have had to do. The kids are kids just pick it up, don't they? There was, when the churches started opening again, we left what we always do at Easter, we had to do it a bit later this year, was leave them seeds, because we have a growing competition as part of our group. So we talk about, new life and stuff like that. So obviously everything happened a bit later in the year. It didn't quite coincide with Easter and all that kind of teachings, but we were still able to teach that, which was great. It involved, rather than them bringing their plants in, it involved them sending us pictures on WhatsApp. Every Friday they would have a bit of input from us. Either it would be we've done a colouring competition. We've done a colouring competition. We've done where we've printed out, we sent things for them to print out and colour in. And obviously we had to be part of the colouring competition as well. We did the seeds. We did recorded myself on YouTube reading a couple of the passages out of the I Belong book. I did a What Are You Thankful For? That is one of the main focuses that I teach as part of the programme, is the being thankful. It's easy for kids to pray for what they want. It's a bit harder for them to realise actually what they've got. So that's a big thing. And it was, I don't think I'm oversimplifying it. It was as easy as that. Obviously, it does require you to have adapt and, you know, have these communications and have internet access and all that, but most of the kids do it. I mean, it's got to have to be different for different parishes and different, you know, demographics of your community. But for us, it was just, it had to happen. It's such a, the First Holy Communion is such a family event for us in the church. It's not just about those kids coming to church. It's about their mums who haven't been to church in 10 years coming. It's about, you know, dads that get dragged kicking and screaming the first 2 weeks, and then by the third week they're giving out the tea and coffee. And how many children families did you have? We also have a travelling community. So all in all, we've done 32 First Holy Communions over about 8 weeks. So once we'd kind of done the main stage of the teaching, we put out the dates over the September and October weekends, got them to pick like a first and second choice, and then collated that into like groups of 4 or 5, and then that became the Zoom groups. So once we had them, it was then when it kind of changed from the WhatsApp to the Zoom. And obviously you've got to make sure obviously that your safeguarding and all that is all up to date and everybody's happy to carry forward and all of that. Luckily I've got Karen O'Connor that is by my side. No, we didn't have many. Pauline just asked, did we have any individual meetings with parents? Not until the day of the reconciliation had I actually met a lot of the parents, other than them kind of putting their heads in the background of the Zoom chats. So yeah, that was really nice to put some names to faces and all that. When you meet them, it feels like they all know you and I know nobody. So once we'd got into our little individual Zoom groups, it was a case of then, right, we're going to focus on reconciliation. Kids kind of, I find they get quite anxious. They do get quite anxious over that. But when it's easier to kind of play it down and, you know, make it more of a natural process when you're face to face with them, because, you know, they see, I will, when we do our when we meet on normal, the way our normal routine goes is that we all meet, we go into mass, and then we have the lesson after, and they will always see me go into confession on a Saturday morning. In between, after the mass, I will go into confession and then go and do the lesson. So we make it more of a natural process. It's just like another thing that goes hand in hand with church. Whereas when they've not been in the church, it was there was a lot more anxiety, you know, even the parents, we were getting a lot more emails and, you know, even down to, you know, what should they be wearing? You know, can we come in with them? You know, all of that. So that was more about handling the parents' anxieties more than anything else. So what we did was, because they weren't at school, they were either making their First Holy Communions on the Saturday or the Sunday. So on the Friday Mass, they would come to Mass and do their reconciliation after that Mass. We just did that in the Lady Chapel. We just set up 2 seats with the priest, and they just did it in the Lady Chapel quietly, and beforehand gave them, you know, the script to rehearse, and, you know, just try to reassure them that, you know, we're all sinners, and that's what the great part of God is, you know, to forgive us and move on, and that's why we forgive each other, and they're just, I love them. I love every year. I say, oh, this has been the best year of kids, but this year was just amazing because even though we were apart, I felt like I got to know them a bit more, because you were in those little groups. And so then when the days of we had some baptisms as well thrown in the mix, because then it's like little sisters want to wear their little dress and all that. So there were some weeks where, you know, we were saying, right, okay, so First Holy Communion starts at 1 o'clock. We were actually having a baptism at 12 o'clock. So, but it was just really a case of, there's just, St. George's, it just works. It just everything just falls to place. We lost a priest at one point. We found him. We forgot to tell him to come. But on the days it was lovely because they were intimate. You know, we had the catechist. There's myself. There's Karen O'Connor, who is the parish gatekeeper. She's going to hate me for saying that. Yeah, so Karen O'Connor keeps us all going. We manage numbers in the church by, it was 6. It was a bench each, basically. We were in the rule of 6 at that point. So that's how we managed it. I mean, there was a couple, there's a couple of kids that pulled out because they have big Italian families and they couldn't possibly make First Holy Communion without Nono and Nonna and whoever else coming over from Italy. So they've all been penciled in for next year, unfortunately, but which is a shame because I think they really missed out on a really, really special day. I'm not saying that the other days when you've got like 30 kids in at one time isn't special, but you know, the priest, you know, he brought in photos of when he was young, and you know, even like Father Allen did my First Holy Communion, he did my marriage, he's done all my kids' christenings. You know, I've known him as long as I can remember, but I learned so much about him, you know, and he was down with the kids during it, and because there was just like 5 kids all sat spaced out around the altar, and it was a really, really special day. And even post-COVID, I would go back to doing it like that. I'm trying to convince Karen to let me do them like that after COVID. So yeah, they were really nice. Okay, it was it took like nearly 2 months to get through them, but I just think they just got so much more out of the day. It was so much more personal. That meeting with Jesus, it was just so, you could see it on their faces, you could feel it. It was more spiritual, it was calmer. Like I say, little brothers and sisters, it is really a family event. They were all involved. It was just lovely. So it was well worth it in the end to see those little faces all really happy. And so, yeah, so if I had my choice, I would do it like that again.
That's great, Sinead. Thank you. What challenges did you find particularly in the kind of preparation time that came up from going from the usual that we're all used to kind of having everybody in one room together to trying to do it remotely?
It was more the parents, managing the parents' anxieties. Obviously there was a few with, you know, concerns with regards to, you know, like being COVID-19 safe. Then there was other ones that, you know, how all of our family can't come, you know, big Irish families, where is everybody going to be? But you know, we even took our own photos. I even took photos and took them home and enhanced them, because we couldn't have a photographer in. And Father Allen said my photos were better anyway. So yeah, so it's managing that kind of thing that I think the parents thought that it wasn't going to be as special. I think that was their main concern, that it was just going to be like any other day at church, really. But I don't think anybody actually, on the day when it happened, I think everybody was very happy. So
excellent.
Yeah.
How did you find the delivering of the sessions, like over Zoom, or you say like, or when you did the one which was just on YouTube, so you can't even get a response, so just kind of talking at a camera or a phone?
Yeah.
How was that experience, and how did you feel the children got from it as well?
I mean, the benefit of the YouTube reading the stories was it was good because they can watch them again.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, a little girl who's got her own iPad or tablet or whatever, she would watch them before she goes to bed, which was really nice. It was nice for me because my own kids don't want to listen to me, so it was nice that someone else's kid was listening to me. Yeah, and then obviously like the feedback sessions, kids have got such wonderful questions and they've got such a wonderful way of explaining things that even adults don't understand. So especially when you're in the smaller groups, one kid would have a question and the other kid would answer it before I'd even have a chance to kind of be like, I'm still scratching my head thinking of an easy way to explain it, you know, like the Trinity and that kind of thing. And you know, and God, somebody came up with just God forgive murderers, and I'm thinking, right, how do I say this? And this other kid came out with, well, of course he does, of course he does. That's personal between them. Something about your journey with God is personal, or something like that. And I just thought that was really sweet. So yeah, you end up learning as much from them as they learn from you, I think.
Definitely, I've found that in every program I've been on as well.
Yeah.
A child will say something and be like, wow, okay, I never thought of that way. That's a really profound way.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. If opportunities for anyone else to drop any questions you may have into the chat. What we're going to do now in a moment is go into some breakout rooms so we can have a little discussion and share maybe about not just about how we would like to do First Holy Communion, but if also an opportunity of we've got so many catechists here to hear from each other, and an easiest way to do that is in smaller groups. So in a moment you will see a hopefully picture come up, a little box come up on your screen asking you to join a breakout group. So if you press yes on that, that'll be absolutely excellent. And then don't worry about, we'll catch up any questions after the breakout groups. And we're also going to have a input from my colleague Claire McKenzie, who is our safeguarding advisor for the diocese. So she'll be able to help at any questions you may have about how do we do this online catechesis in the safest and the best way if you choose to go along that route. So the group should hopefully be popping up now. So hopefully you should see them, and hope to see everyone in about 15 minutes time. Claire, thank you very much for joining us. I've just mentioned very briefly about your role. Do you want to explain a little bit more about it?
So I can see a few familiar faces on the screen anyway, so I know a few people. So my role is the safeguarding coordinator for the diocese, and amongst other things, I look after safe recruitment, work with volunteers to make sure activities are safe, as well as dealing with cases that come into the diocese, and also training. So I've been training this afternoon, training tonight, training tomorrow. So a bit of a training couple of days. It's very exciting not to be sitting at home every day this week. So that's been quite nice. So yeah, I mean, one of the things that I do during normal times is go out to parishes and meet volunteers and do some general safeguarding training. And nearly always that will involve some catechists and children's liturgy, which we talked to them on Tuesday. Obviously, it's been difficult. It's been impossible this year because we made an active decision not to come out to parishes, but that will resume next year, in 2021 as soon as we can get started. So really, what I'm here to do is just to talk to you a little bit about just being mindful that although Zoom and the other sort of platforms that you can use are have been provided us with, all of us, with ways in which we can engage with the people we work with, volunteer with, as well as socialise with, for that matter, that there are some risks, and there is some policy which we just need to be mindful of. And that policy was written specifically by the Church for exactly this situation. So quite early on, the Catholic Safeguarding Service decided that they would put together a policy because, in exactly the same way as some people have already been saying, people started involving children in various activities online. So I think the first thing to say is all of that is great, and what I don't want you to go away with at the end of this is thinking I'm pouring a bucket of cold water on it all, because that's the last thing I want to do. But what I've discovered in this job is often when people get it wrong, it's because they haven't really, it's not because they've set out to do that, it's because they just didn't realise that some of the things that needed to be in place. So the thing I would say is, and first thing is, if you've been doing online things with your First Communion children or other children, and afterwards you go away and think, I didn't do that, or I did it this way, this is not about blame, it's not about telling people off, it's simply about saying, this is the best way to do it to keep everyone safe. And to some extent, there has to be a little bit of flexibility. So what I'm telling you is the official policy, really. It's not me making it up. So I think the first thing to say is, and I'm sure that some of you on here have already said you're teachers, so you'll know this as just as much as I do, that a social media platform, any online platform, has its risks, because essentially what it's doing is providing a window into the world of that child, and we need to be very careful as to how we protect that access to the child. So I think the first thing to say is that before any of this starts, the person running it needs to have a risk assessment in place. Now, Joe and I talked about this before the 2 sessions, and it would make sense for us to have one sort of standard template for the diocese, so you're not all reinventing the wheel. So it's really thinking about what's the potential risks, how will you manage the risks, and it also means that the people who are running the activity need to be aware of that risk assessment and basically sign it off to say, yeah, we know where the risks lie. The second thing that I think you need to think about before you do this is permissions. Now, I guess, and listening to what you're saying, in many cases you're going to have the parents there at the same time as the children, in which case you probably don't really need a permission form, but I would say it's good practice to do it. And the permission form for this, for any online activity, is not my invention, it's the invention of the Catholic Safeguarding Service. And I'm hoping it's on the website. I'm not sure if it is yet, because I haven't been in the office long enough this week to try and find out. But certainly Joe has one, and there's one online, and you can edit it for your own parish. And it means that then if you decide, if you always have the parents there, well, maybe you don't really need it. But it covers you if they're not there, because obviously you are essentially being in a situation where you're with a child alone, and they're quite young children. And who should store that form? I would say whoever's in charge of the catechist group. I think you've got to just think about how, where that's stored. So what are the sort of general things you need to think about? Obviously, I'm guessing many children will be using parental accounts, because you've got to be careful about the age restrictions of the platform. So somebody was talking about Facebook. Well, obviously children can't have a Facebook account legally if they're making First Communion, but they may be using a parent's account, which is fine. The group that you set up, whether it's Facebook or whether it's a WhatsApp group or whether you decide to do it on Zoom, needs to be in the name of the group or the parish. In other words, what I'm saying is it shouldn't be your personal account. And again, when you're organising the communication, really you should be setting up an organisational account. And what I mean by that is a parish account or a subgroup of your parish needs to set up an account. Ideally, you should be using equipment that belongs to the parish, but I think we've got to be realistic here, and not every parish has got that, and not everybody's going to have access to a parish computer. It may well be better for you to do it from home, but I think that's where you do need the protection of a standard account. So not using your own personal social media, your own phone number, your own personal emails, all of that you can only really do that if you've got the parents' permission to do that. So if you are going to email, then you need to have, that's when you will need the parental permission form. So you've got to sort of think about, this is where you've got to put the time in before you start. Obviously give parents information about the platform. I'm guessing you'll have to do that because probably they're the ones who are going to download it. And also make available to parents, and I think Sinead mentioned it earlier, sometimes parents want to contact you about something. So that contact information needs to be available for parents. And again, you could put that on the bottom of the permission form. You know, you can edit it to put whatever you like on it, as long as you've got the basic permissions. So where should the meeting be? Well, the children need to be in a place that's visible to others. In other words, you don't really want them to be joining the meeting on their own in a bedroom or in a closed room, mainly because, well, first of all, it's risky for the people involved in the meeting, but also because if anybody does get access to your meeting, somebody who's not part of the group, it starts to provide information about that child and their environment. And what we don't want is somebody getting access to a child because they have got into the group illegally or inappropriately. And much as we put locks on things and we try and make sure that doesn't happen, unfortunately, there are people out there who prey on children, and they will be looking for these sorts of opportunities. They'll be aware that things like this are happening. And Zoom isn't as secure as some of the other setups. Most of them are now, and they've all adapted over the time of the pandemic, but some are better than others, to be honest. Now, the other thing is, and you'll be used to this from when you're doing this in person, there need to be 2 DBS checked adults doing the online ministry. So if it's happening with a group, you need 2 adults there. They both need to have a DBS check, and they both need to have some familiarity with safeguarding policies, procedures, you know, what to do if, who to report to, that sort of thing. Now, if you haven't got if people who are doing this, maybe because they don't normally get involved in the catechist group, or because they're more technically minded and you might want them to get involved, all you need to do is talk to your safeguarding rep in the parish, and they can give you all the paperwork. As soon as you get the paperwork into us, we can process a check very quickly. They come through quickly. It just takes a bit of time to get them set up, and the parish reps who I know are on here will bear me up on that. But effectively, what you're doing is you're trying to recreate in a different way what you would be doing face to face with the children in the times you would normally be meeting with them. In terms of the room itself, I'm guessing the children are all very well behaved. It's not quite the same as dealing with teenagers in a school or something, but basically I think it is always worth starting off by talking about what you want, what the ground rules are, basically. So how they participate, you know, with how you manage muting and so on. How they present themselves on the screen. So ideally you do not want them in the pajamas, or you want them appropriately dressed. How they interact with others. Do they interact with others? That's another issue, isn't it? How they do that. How and when they leave the meeting, you know, what happens if someone just leaves? What do you do about that? And can they come back into it? What to do if the connection fails, which, let's face it, we've all experienced that, and that happens. Being respectful to each other. And then lastly, and this one I think, again, with any children's activity, it's always a good idea at the start to say what to do if something makes them concerned or upset, or something happens. What should they do? Who should they tell? I suppose mostly they're going to tell their parents and ask them to contact you, but maybe you need to think about other ways. What you don't want to be doing is being in a one-to-one conversation with them. So if you're going to have them, you're going to contact, what I would suggest, if they do want to talk to you, contact them separately. Don't have them staying behind at the end of a meeting. Do a separate conversation and involve parents, get parents involved in that. Setting up the meeting, well, it depends on what you use, of course, but think about where you are as well. Think about what sort of background you've got. So somebody, I'll do the questions all at the end, because otherwise it just goes on a bit. So think about your background, set up a waiting room. So you invite people into the meeting, and as long as you've got a decent Zoom account, you'll be able to lock it once everyone's in the meeting. Screen sharing, it should only really be the host who does that. And it sort of avoids crossways conversations. So again, and if you have permission to share screenshots, then you have to make sure that the meeting ID is only available to the people in the meeting. And also be careful about posting personal information. So birthdays, email addresses, phone numbers on the screen. Usually that happens quite inadvertently. And sometimes it can happen because somebody holds up something and it's got something on there already. So just be wary of giving that sort of information out, because what we don't want is this to be almost like a notice board you're putting up in somebody's front garden and saying, this is where Sophie lives and this is her phone number and her birthday's next week, because that's allowing somebody potentially access to that child. Obviously, don't let anybody in who you don't know. And I was saying in the meeting on Tuesday, I was in a conference. I was actually having my hair done at the time, believe it or not. I was on a conference call with my headphones in, and I joined the conference by phone. And I could hear in the background people going, who's this person? Who's this person? We don't know them, because normally I would be on the screen. And in fact, what they did was they phoned me and said, who are you? And they would only let me into the meeting once they identified who I was. So, it is important to make sure you've only got people there. If anybody, I doubt you get this, but if you did have any behaviour that's inappropriate, make sure it's recorded and you think about what you're going to do with that information. Is it a case of talking to parents? Is it something you need to report further up the line? And then lastly, when the meeting closes, the platform should be closed to everyone. In other words, don't allow people to stay behind for a separate chat. Apart from obviously the adults who are leading it, that's fine, because you might want to stay behind and say, well, that went well, or how would we do it next week, or whatever. But none of the participants to stay online. And really, it's up to you whether you decide to have the parents with them or not. So parents with them all the time on screen, you can live without the permissions. Parents not on the screen, you do need the permissions. And somebody just asked if you can put the sort of, I can't remember what it said now. Was it the rules or something? I can't remember.
Yes. Could you add the rules into the permission slip?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, good idea. Really good idea. It's a Word document, and you do have to edit it anyway, because it's sort of, because it's a very generic document for the whole Catholic Church in England and Wales, and it doesn't just apply to First Communion. So yeah, you can put anything you like on there, but I think that's a really good idea, actually. So that's me.
Excellent. If you have any questions for Claire, if you can pop them in the chat. If you can't access the chat, I'm flicking through the screen looking for people waving, but if I don't see you, please do feel free to shout if you have any particular questions. Okay. So part of both myself and Claire work for the Central Diocesan team, and the reason we exist is to try and make parish life easier and support the parishes. So as Claire mentioned at the beginning, we'll be working on a risk assessment. Joe, could you send the 2 documents to us, please? Do you mean? Oh yes, okay. So we're going to be working on a risk assessment and the permission slip, and if already done, but you can access. And we'll also be creating a document about how to use these online platforms in a way that's safe, with screenshots, so you can say, okay, do this, this, and this, if that's how you choose to go along the way to do that. So the idea, hopefully, we can share that with others. Okay, we've got a couple of questions coming in. I'm the only catechist at our church, so how would this work getting another adult with me? Okay, Claire might be able to answer that one, and then I can hopefully add anything on the end.
Well, I would say that you've always got to have 2 adults there. So that would be an issue whether you were online or whether you were in person. So the guidance is always there should be 2 DBS checked adults with the children. I mean, the way to do it, I suppose, is to see if you can get someone else in the parish who is DBS checked, who's just happy to be there as a sort of observer. Or maybe you could get one of the parents to go through the process and be willing to sort of take the lead with you. It's basically so that, you know, if you were in a physical space, so that if that adult leaves the room, there's still a DBS checked adult there. So that you have got to think about that. But, you know, it doesn't really mean that the person who you get alongside you has got to lead the programme. It just means you've got that other person there, and that's as much for your protection, really, as well as for the children.
Excellent. Yeah, I would say I've had experience of this in real life. There were just 2 of us running the first telecommunion programme, and the person was away. So we had an extraordinary minister from the parish who was DBS checked, who just sat there in the hall of well, didn't say anything, didn't have to, like, they weren't leading any part of it. They were just there to kind of make sure, like, to back, for my protection, for the children's protection, that we had that support. So that's one way. So if you've got extraordinary ministers in your parish, they'll be DBS checked. Your parish priest will be parish safeguarding rep. All those people will be able to be there. And as Claire said, it might have been an opportunity for more people. Yeah.
A lot of you Eucharistic ministers also, but there are a lot of roles where people are checked, you know, to be available. And sometimes people who might not be particularly active in their role, but their DBS check is up to date, they would be fine to do it. But you can recruit somebody else. You know, if you can get a parent who's willing to step up to the plate, then they'll be fine as well.
Excellent. So next question was, if there's an acceptable reason why a child would be left alone in a Zoom meeting, I would just say to the parents, they can't. Question come in? Yeah, that's absolutely fair. Say if that's an absolutely fair thing to do if you want to have that of a golden rule. And I think it's a great way to include the parents into the program as well, which is always quite nice. If there any official guidance from the diocese around the programs that we should be using? Pauline, do you mean program in the Zoom, or do you mean in the catechetical resource?
Catechetical resources. Sorry, I've just gone off. I've gone off at a tangent. Sorry.
Not a problem at all. That is a good question. At the moment, no. I've just kind of I've started this job in August, and it's one thing that I definitely want to be looking at. I'm going to hopefully review a lot of the programs, and so I got a bit of a dry throat there, and say pros and cons on each end, because there's some programs that would be amazing in some parishes, and in another parish, because of the context, because of the children you're working with, might not. So and I definitely haven't found a kind of silver bullet program that works perfectly in every situation. I still hold out hope one day there might be one, but if sometimes good to use bits of different ones. I know some parishes prefer to, or I call that Frankenstein one, take bits from different ones to try and meet it. So hopefully within the next couple of months we'll something that we'll be able to do, and especially I want to hear from catechists. So if you've got a program you particularly like, for any reasons, if you want to email me, that's absolutely great. If there's a program that you particularly don't like, then also the same, so that we can also add those particular negative points to our review in the program. I think it's best to hear from those catechists in particular. Excellent. Any more questions on anything? So
yes.
Oh, sorry, I heard
me,
that.
Hilary.
Oh, Hilary, go for it, Hilary.
I was going to say that ideally you would have a parent with the child, but if you've got a family where there's a single mum with 3 or 4 kids, it's a no-no, totally, because it would just be disruptive. And that's partly why we've decided not to use any online things with our kids, because partly because of that, one of our schools has a lot of families like that, but also some of the children don't have the internet and they're excluded. So it's not fair. But our schools have been very supportive. So we're doing it in year bubbles in schools. So.
Excellent. That's another approach. I'm happy to be corrected on this, but my understanding at the moment of the COVID regulations is that religious education, such as catechesis, Sunday schools, fall into the exempt section for children. So we could do a physical one and then we're thinking of our property department at Diocese if we filled out the necessary risk assessments around that way and doing it in a COVID safe way. But you may find that if, though possible, isn't practical for your environment. So you may want to do it online, and maybe you want to do a kind of mix and match, an open air one if you're in a particular sunny area of our diocese, or in the Freedom area that is Rutland, that's only area not in tier 3. Excellent. So I'll hopefully share it. Go for it, Claire.
Sorry, I forgot this on Tuesday as well. The other thing is, what I'm going to say, you've got to be very careful about recording. So if you record a session, that's video or audio, I would say don't, because you come up against all sorts of GDPR problems if that's the case. So you're not, when you are getting your permission form, you're not getting permission for recording. Obviously, as adults, we can all give Joe permission to talk, to listen for us, but we shouldn't be doing that for children. So even though it's tempting to do it, I think it's definitely one to avoid.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, like, personally, I never would. I just for this is adults and everything, and the way I edit the video afterwards to make sure people are cut out really. So question comes through there: are you thinking about guidance on confirmation? We're working on something at the moment, hopefully having a new program that can be a diocese-wide program, and we hope to have information. We're hoping to have information out before Christmas, but unfortunately it's not looking like we will, but hopefully as soon as we can in January, hopefully a new program that'll be run in conjunction with NDCYS, our youth service at the Briars. Thank you very much for joining us, everyone. I'll stop the recording